Greetings, everyone, from Lake Wissota in beautiful western Wisconsin, and welcome to another episode of Talk Hidden Chippewa Valley, where I take your questions that people have who have submitted them through my website at johnkinville.com. And as always, if you could subscribe to this channel and like this video, it would be greatly appreciated. So let us begin. So here's the first question that was submitted to me via my website, johnkinville.com. If you ever have any questions or just a comment you would like to share on any of the videos, go ahead and visit johnkinville.com and you can submit a comment through the contact part of the page. So the first question comes to us from Mike in Hurley, Wisconsin. Hurley, up there on the Wisconsin UP border. Mike writes, Irvine is my favorite park in the entire state of Wisconsin, and I've always wondered how Chippewa Falls was able to pull it off. No offense, but a park that incredible isn't normal for a city of your size. Truly an incredible story. I'm now a huge fan of William Irvin. Anything else you can share about him in terms of the man? Yeah, sure, Mike. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I mean, as a member of the Chippewa Valley, we very much love our park. And I think we do take it for granted, though, occasionally. I know during the summer months, I'm usually up there once a week, just kind of driving through or walking through or checking out the animals. So thank you so much. And we are more than happy to share our beloved park with good people like you, Mike. So greetings. And hopefully you're not as, well, I know that you're just as cold as we are here in the Chippewa Valley. And even though I was raised in the Chippewa Valley, I'm actually from Norway, Michigan, born in Norway, Michigan, so not too far from Hurley. So, Mike, to answer your question, William Irvin, I don't know how to say this, but he's a unicorn. I mean, Chippewa Falls has a unicorn on their hands. He's a one-off. He's somebody who's very, very special. He is, I would argue, the most consequential resident in the history of Chippewa Falls. And you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who has done more for everyone in the community more than William Irvin has. And even to this day in that episode, both him and his daughter Ruth set up those two trust funds. So each year, according to the current park director, the Irvins through the grave are donating $30,000 to $40,000 in accrued interest money from those two I'm sorry, I'm looking for the right word, but the foundations that they have set up where that money is donated for park maintenance. I mean, that's incredible. It's just incredible. And so we were so lucky, so blessed to have him in our city's history. And I think that some of these episodes will hopefully kind of re-highlight just how important this man is, especially after the closing of production at Leinenkugel's. Leinenkugel's is a huge part of who we are as Chippewyans, but Irvin Park goes even deeper. It cuts deeper because Leinenkugel's is alcohol. And so there are some people, and legitimately alcohol has pros and cons to it, but there are no pros and cons to Irvin Park. The thing is just incredible. And for him to have the foresight that he did, and to have the planning and to take his money and his generosity. But to answer your question more specifically, yes, I've got a few things I can share with you. First, to reflect the man himself, and Mike, next time you come down from Hurley and you come through the park, when you go into the park, you're going to see a pavilion, and that's the pavilion that Irvin built in 1908. On top of the pavilion, there's a symbol. It looks like the Jewish Star of David, but it's not. It's actually a hexagram. It's a 6-pointed star. And Irvin is a man who is really thinking deeply. He is a man who's thinking about the human condition. He's not just thinking about himself or even just his community, but he's thinking about humanity. And that symbol of the hexagram shows two equilateral triangles coming from different directions that are overlapping. And it's meant to be geometrically sound and symmetrical, and it's meant to show basically three things. And those three things are something that he believed in, which is harmony, balance, and the unity of opposites. And he believed that the park could bring everything together in a very perfect way. So what was inspiring him? Well, I think there were two things that were really inspiring him. First was environmental. So if you look at the environmental significance of the hexagram, you will see that it's meant to reflect the two triangles are essentially fire and water, and then you have the two aspects of air and earth. And if you put that together, you come up with a hexagram. But William Irvin is also a member of the Freemasonic fraternity, and he very, very much believes in the Freemasonic teachings that we should meet each other on the level as it was in terms of social, racial, economic classes. And so I think he feels that the park is a good place for all of that to happen. And the hexagram in Masonic teachings tends to focus on the opposites of error and truth, ignorance and wisdom, and evil and good. And so the goal is just to always try to balance and to keep ourselves within due bounds. So quite a guy. The other thing I'll share with you is, he dies in 1927, and this is the height of the Ku Klux Klan fraternity across the United States, where racial, immigrant, ethnic, religious tensions are at, I don't want to say an all-time high in America, but pretty darn close. And Irvin's not that. Like, Irvin is really good and dear friends with A.B. McDonnell. And William Irvin is a Protestant Christian. A.B. McDonnell is a Catholic Christian. These guys are close. They work together on the park. A.B. McDonnell used to be mayor. McDonnell wanted Irvin to be mayor, even though he did not serve. And so William Irvin is a force for good. He's a force for good in an era and in several eras where there were moments in time in our city's past where things could have gotten pretty dicey in terms of cultural divisions. And we were lucky. And again, I use the phrase unicorn. William Irvin is a unicorn. Not every wealthy person is going to be as socially and civically minded and think long-term in terms of what's going to happen after their life. And I'm so glad that so many people watched the episodes and enjoyed it, because in some ways it's less about the park and it's more about the man who is the one who gives us the park. And I don't have to explain the significance of the park to people who are watching this, because the park is an extension of our family. So, Mike, there it is. One more thing I can tell you is that he loved automobiles. There's a picture of him in the sleigh with his daughter Ruth in the video, in the episode, but he loved cars. He was kind of he's a man's man. And so he's got these really cool social and cultural sensitivities and this deep thinking as a philosopher. But man, he loves the sound of that engine. And he's alive as he's seeing the transition from the horse and buggy to the automobile. I must apologize because my cats are running around. You can probably see I left the door open because we're kind of at the witching hour of the day for my 4 cats, and they're exploring. And so I let them in the room, and so you might hear a few noises here or there, or I don't know, maybe we'll get lucky or unlucky and have one of them jump up here. So thanks, Mike. I appreciate your question, and thanks again. The second question comes to us from Susan in Jim Falls. Hey, Susan. Love Jim Falls. You got some great restaurants, bar restaurants up there. And each summer, I love to take the bicycle path, the Old Abe State Trail from Cornell all the way down to Durand. And boy, that's a good exercise, and it's a wonderful, beautiful, scenic trail. So thank you for submitting the question. Here it is. I was disheartened by some of the people who went after you over this episode on Facebook and social media. They were very personal about it, and I was also very impressed with how you handled it. Oh, thank you. Did you receive any other attacks we are not aware of? Sorry if that's too forward of me to ask. Well, yeah, so I guess let me start with this. I want to start by taking a little bit of accountability for this, because in the episode Mispronounced, I did have the thumbnail, the cover photo, in which I put it, say Irvin, not Irvine, take the challenge, so to speak. And for those who just saw the thumbnail in particular, I think it immediately triggered them, which I'll take some accountability. I think that's just part of the marketing of getting people to click on something, right? So I will take some accountability for that. But you can also tell which people watched the episode and those who didn't, because and I get analytics on this. So for each video I have on YouTube, it tells me how far the average person gets in. And I think on that episode, I think most people only got into like 8.5 minutes before they shut it off or moved on or pressed pause and waited to watch the end. I think some people were just triggered by the name change and just dwelled on that and didn't completely watch the story of William Irvin. And I think those who completed the whole episode itself got a full new appreciation for William Irvin. But yes, there were a couple of Facebook groups in which some people were saying some things that weren't exactly kind, or it just got a little out of hand. And there was one exchange where I had kind of reached my peak, and I had said a couple things that I don't think it was out of line, but it was a little out of character for me too. I'm a high school teacher, and I'm on bus duty and I'm on cafeteria duty. So I have my fill and I have a lot of practice with dealing with folks who kind of get in their lower brain. And I try to not get into my lower brain as much as I possibly can. But we're all human. So first of all, Susan, I would say that for the people who said some unkind things, I think they come from a good place. It just manifested in a way that in some cases wasn't very constructive. So for example, I got called woke. I got called a liberal, woke, outside agitator. I think there were people who don't know me or hadn't heard of me who assumed that I was this left-wing cancel culture out-of-towner from some big city who was swooping in and just changing everything that we supposedly know. And I'm not a left-wing wokist cancel culture person. But on the opposite side, and it was pretty even, I also got called Trump. I got accused of trying to do to Irvine Park what Trump is doing with the Gulf of Mexico by renaming it the Gulf of America. And I had some people say that I was a kind of a dictatorial presence like Trump apparently is to them. So it was sort of bizarre. And of course, a lot of my students are watching this stuff unfold too. And so when I would walk into class and they're like, wow, you got called woke and Trump at the same time. And they got kind of a kick out of that. But in terms of some of the comments I received privately, yeah, I got some pretty interesting things. I got told to F off, and I was accused of making things up, and I was accused of just stirring up trouble and things like that. But I don't want to get into too many specifics about that. I'm not going to get into names or anything like that. Here is what I'll chalk it up to. Irvine Park, as envisioned and created by William Irvin, has done exactly what he thought it would do. It is a place that has become an extension of our family. It's an extension of how we feel in our heart. It's where we go in a pinch when we don't have anything to do, when we just want to stretch our legs and in some cases refresh our batteries, recharge our batteries. And the park is a part of our DNA. And so when somebody comes along and says, hey, it's pronounced wrong, and there's a member of the family who we'll get to later, when he says you're pronouncing it wrong, well, when you've been saying a name a certain way for a long time, and your relatives have been saying it a certain way for a long time. It's a healthy thing to be skeptical of me or anyone else in that moment. But I think for some people, because of that personal aspect of the park, that it led to some more personal comments. And the way I tended to approach all of this is that I'm a teacher. All right. So every quarter I get my new attendance list. And for all of you know out there in Western Wisconsin, know we've got all kinds of just incredibly deliciously fun names to try to pronounce. I've got last names like Schernitz, which when you read it on a piece of paper, you're like, what the, I'm going to mess this up. And I always have to apologize to the students on day one because I know that they're going to take it kind of bad that I mispronounced their name. And there are people who mispronounce Kinville. They call me Kineville. They call me Canville. It's just kind of a thing. I think the part that bothers me the most throughout this whole process is that I'm not making this stuff in a vacuum. I mean, obviously I'm doing the historical research, but I'm also working with a relative of William Irvin, and I'll maybe talk more about that later. But we're working together, and so we had a plan. Like I'll go in and defend my stuff, and that he was going to swoop in at the end and say, "Look, I'm the family. John's right. This is how we pronounce our name. If you wouldn't mind changing it." The bizarre thing was watching some people try to argue with the family and saying that the family's pronouncing it wrong. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, that's just, and to me, that's not a reflection of the vast majority of people. So Susan, most people watched this episode and went, "Oh, I didn't know that," or "I had heard that." And they're good people and want to do the right thing, and there's not one of us out there, not one of you out there who won't correct someone when they mispronounce your name, because it's a very personal thing. And given how much William Irvin has done for our community, I think people are really understanding that, let's try to get this right, I think. So thank you, Susan. The third question comes to us from Kyle in Lake Hallie. Hey, Kyle. Kyle has become a staple on this program as he has never missed an episode in terms of a question. So thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it as always, buddy. He writes, "Heard you've been sick. Are you feeling better? My question is, both William and Adelaide had their wakes and funerals in their home. Was that common back then?" Well, Kyle, first of all, thanks. Yeah, I was sick. I want to give a special shout out to everybody at the Mayo Hospital in Eau Claire in the emergency room, the doctors and nursing staff. They were fantastic. Yeah, I was out of school for a week. Like, it was bad news bears. And I know a lot of you out there have been sick or been dealing with illnesses. So we got to get through this fifth Wisconsin season, which is the deep freeze. They always talk about the four seasons. Well, we've got the deep freeze. So hopefully with March here, we can kind of get past this. But hope everybody's doing well out there. And Kyle, thank you so much. As for your question, yes. So before the modern day funeral industry as we know it, that is very, very corporate. Some would argue it's become very, very impersonal compared to what it used to be in American history. But if you go back to early American history, particularly if you were a farming family, if you were a low-income family, and yes, also if you're the Irvins, that death was not something that you outsourced to somebody else per se, unless the body needed some significant work. So let's say your loved one passed away in the home, whether it was from stillborn or whether it was from old age or some kind of disease. Typically speaking, the family would care for the body in-house. They would wash it themselves. They would dress the body themselves. It was a very personal, very emotional, very surreal experience. And then you would have a casket delivered to the home by wagon, and then you would put your loved one in the casket, and then you would invite the neighbors and your friends and your family to come pay their respects inside the home. And so the wake and the funeral was typically held at the house. And because back then traveling was so difficult, this was also an era in which you would take a picture of the deceased. Corpse photos and then you would have them made into postcards, and then you would mail them to your relatives and friends that were out of country, or if they were maybe in Boston or San Francisco and they couldn't make the funeral. Because embalming was something that was typically reserved for the wealthier classes. In fact, it was actually Abraham Lincoln that kind of made embalming sort of popular amongst the masses because of how long Lincoln's funeral had been from D.C. all the way to Springfield. They had different funerals along the way, and the embalming had made his body preserved very, very well. But typically embalming was not something that was done with the average family as well. So they had to be very timely with the funerary process and the funerary rituals. And I also think that's why the mourning periods were naturally a lot longer. Because if you're sitting there washing, the hands and the feet of the corpse, I mean, folks, it's a very, very personal way of dealing with death. And it can be both a very positive experience, but it can also be a very taxing, emotional, and difficult experience. And so the mourning periods tend to be longer. And then we get into the periods of, let's say, grave robbing and other things. We also have unsanitary conditions, especially in some cases. So the states at the turn of the century start to pass a whole host of different state statutes dealing with things like, for health code reasons, embalming becomes more popular. And then we also have in the funerary industry, we have things like grave vaults, where you put the casket in to prevent grave robbing. And then the funerary industry, as we know it, becomes really popular, especially when Social Security starts to offer a death benefit. And it's like, hey, the first advertisements were, we'll take care of all of this for you. You're going through enough difficult time. Let us take your loved one and prepare them through the funerary process. But to answer your question in short, yes, very, very, very common. In fact, you can expect that almost every single home on the East Hill or West Hill, if it was built in the mid to late 1800s and even early 1900s, that there was definitely at least one funeral in each one of those homes. And don't let that creep you out. Like, it's not something to be creeped out about. In fact, I think there's pros and cons to how they did it back then, and there's pros and cons to how we do it today. But it certainly was a different era. So, Kyle, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate it. And our final question comes to us from Donna in Chippewa Falls. Thanks, Donna. She asks, what can you tell us about Doug Irvin Richter? He made an appearance on some of the Facebook pages, and he introduced himself as a relative of William Irvin. And I think I had a chance to meet him at one time, but it's hard for me to remember. And lastly, I heard that he's coming to the city this summer. Is that something that you can keep us informed about? So, Donna, yeah, Doug Irvin Richter is the great-grandson of William Irvin. And Doug loves the park. In fact, he lives in the southern part of Wisconsin, but he does come up to the park quite frequently each year. And when I reached out to him when I wanted to do this episode about the mispronunciation of Irvin Park, I reached out to him. And so we've been sort of partnering in this ongoing crusade. And I think Doug feels some urgency to all of this, because he is, by all accounts, the last direct lineage of the William Irvin family to try to keep this moving forward. And so, yes, I am pleased to report that Doug is going to be coming up to Chippewa Falls, and he's going to be coming to Irvin Park this summer. And you had better believe it. Yeah, when I can coordinate with him and we can get something firmly set up, we are definitely going to have a meet and greet down at the park. And Doug and I are going to work together, because I think we really need to take this energy and the energy that you folks have, and we're seeing a lot of fantastic positive feedback about the true pronunciation of William Irvin's name. And I think him and I have some ideas as to what we can do. And Doug is not a stranger to the city of Chippewa Falls. I know there was one person on Facebook who kind of accused him of just swooping in, coming out of nowhere. Oh, no. Oh, no. No, 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 no. He has been the grand marshal of a parade here in the city. He comes back every single year. Whenever they have some type of a new cage or some type of a new development at the park, they always invite Doug to come up and to be a part of that. No, no, Doug is not a stranger to the park, and he is not a stranger to the city. In fact, he is a dear friend. He is a huge supporter of what we do up here. And quite frankly, Doug loves us. He loves the people at Chippewa Falls. He loves our city, and he's a great guy. And I can't wait to get him to get to know him a little bit more when he comes up. And absolutely, we are going to have a really good meet and greet for Doug Irvin Richter when he comes up. And he is somebody who takes his family history very, very seriously. And he is kind of on this mission, ever since his grandma, Ruth, had said, look, like, it'd be nice if we could change the pronunciation back to how we do it in our family. Doug is the last stalwart, if you will, of that movement. And so I am just privileged to be able to help be a part of that process. And as you can see, I had these pins made. We're going to park that E. So if you want one of these pins, I don't have many left, but if you want a pin, you can get one on my website. But yeah, this summer we're going to have Doug come up, and it's going to be a good experience. So I really do appreciate that question, Donna. And I think you're going to love this guy. Like he's really a chip off the old Irvin block. He too cares about the environment, and he too cares about what the park means in terms of not just his family, but also the community. And it says a lot about a man when he comes up here several times a year. It's incredible to come up here, because I think it's also very therapeutic for him to connect with his family and his loved ones, just like for all of us. And if that's the swan song of Irvin Park, I think it's that. I think every single person watching this, we have invested and we have put into that place so many memories with the people that we love the most. And Doug is no exception to that. So thank you. As always, thank you for joining me on this episode of Talk Hidden Chippewa Valley, where I took questions about the episode mispronounced Irvin, not Irvine. And as always, until next time, never forget that together we become witnesses to the past and keep their stories alive.